Good morning, everyone. Today's webinar in our webinar series on the 3D experience for global medical device development will focus on requirement management or traceable requirements and risk control. So this is quite a large part of the 3D experience platform. Formerly known as Enovia, which covers requirements, and it's requirements used for quite different purposes within the application, and they're typically applied, or requirement management in general is typically used for some specific purposes. Core reason to have requirement management integrated in the PLM platform or in 3D experience is to map the requirements to the products and prototypes, and map them to prototypes might in the medical device world mean that we mapped into the MRS and PRS and system requirement specs, but it could also mean that we map them to the product compliance requirements, or both. So a detailed mapping of requirements to the relevant tests and standards used for determine if our products are in line with product requirements or product compliance requirements. For example, to fulfill the product part of the CE mark, or a product requirement setup for any other market. And then the requirements are mapped to different test series and different standards, which in turn are mapped to different regulations and regulatory contexts. And then at any point in time, you can determine, are our products in compliance with regards to the targeted markets. But it could also be general requirement management, mapping customer requirements, mapping different product configurations in order to understand how do we manage and fulfill requirements for different customers or with different products, and how do we develop those requirements over time. From a medical device perspective, following design controls, with design inputs, we have a clearly defined a way of structuring our requirements and deciding upon requirements. And if we are to update them, we really need the traceability on document level for the DHF. We need to understand the mapping towards the risk and potential risk control measures or mitigations. So that's the kind of follow-up. So these are just two good examples on how we use requirements. Of course, it's also used for document management practices. So the requirement specs, or different kinds of requirement specs, are part of our DHF, so part of our defined deliverables. And if we are to have good traceability on requirements, we want to generate the documents and the document deliverables within the DHF, map to those two basic requirements. And of course, that's potentially done with a data-driven implementation on the 3D experience platform. Okay, so today's topic, traceable requirements and risk controls. And as mentioned, it makes sense to connect the requirements to our different product definitions. These are products, product families, product configurations, but also the top-level assemblies to be able to determine which or what risk analysis were used, what requirement spec were used for a specific design. It's of course used in order to map different requirements, breakdown of requirements, mapping of different physical prototypes to requirements, different test sets, different risk mitigations. And of course, usually when implementing the Frida Experience platform, especially if we base it on License Secure, we implement both project control or DHF and the product control. And this means, of course, that we map the requirements to the different deliverables, especially the design inputs there. Okay, so if we look at the different requirements-related activities from an early phase, pre-study phase, or conceptual phase. For the pre-study phase, we might capture the market requirement spec. We do have good tools within the Frida Experience platform. They've been around for a few years now. It's the part of the suite called Ideation, which is typically used in order to capture the voice of the customer, doing ranking of different requirements, doing requirements priorities, and also determine what we bring with us from the pre-study phase, conceptual ideas and ID management into the actual new development project or product maintenance. So at the Fuzzy front end, we do have the possibilities to transfer and make ideas concrete and turn them into requirements. So they might be summarized in the MRS, market requirement spec. During the planning phase, we'll set up the plan, and as part of that, we map the different deliverables. And of course, we have the product requirement spec, the subsystem requirement spec, the system requirement spec, any detailed specification. And we want to generate those specifications data-driven, so break them down into single requirements, and we want to have version control, revision control, and approval processes for the different requirements as they are mapped to the products and the projects. So that's the first connection. We might have templates for our different specs. We want to send those out with the tasks which we distribute with the project module. And as part of those deliverables, we'll make the requirement specs available. As we're starting up the products, whatever we agree on the DHF in a gate review is transferred to the product. So as we grow in the development project, we're building up the requirement set for the new product and product definition. And this is typically captured on sales item level, perhaps for different evolutions, but it can potentially be broken down and mapped down to specific configurations. And but what's typically done is, of course, the tools to detail the requirements, map the different requirements to the tests, set up tests, and keep this definition up to date. It connects the requirements to the change process. So you, when you're setting up new requirements, you can trigger the change requests or the changes directly from the requirement user interface. Additionally, the system provides functionality to define hazards. You can do this either in the project mode or in product mode, where you define the different hazards and perform a risk analysis. And you set up the hazard control measures. You track the different states of risk control and define your risk control measures. So it's a completely integrated process mapped to the DHF, mapped to the medical device model. And as your validation iterations progress, you have the different hazard mitigation methods. How far are we with each risk? Analysis, evaluation, risk reduction, verification, or completion. How far are we? And what kind of residual risk do we have left in our device design? So that's typically the tools we work with. And of course, the essence is when we release a product towards a market, it's then given back from the development project back to the product line organization or the product maintenance. And the risk analysis that are then continuously updated with new changes and change projects or change request and change orders. So whenever we have a change, large or small, we can reconnect to the risk analysis, which was developed as part of the design controls, understand the previous root cause analysis, see that history, review the risk control measures, see if we need to detail the risks, have we had any confirmation on the risk control measures, and how do we take that forward. So it's a closed loop from initial requirements to through to the risk resolution. To give you an idea of functionality, let's log into the environment. And it's starting up here. Let's see if we have a proper connection. Seems not. It's a little bit slow. So let's. We'll give it a few seconds while loading. So a comment on the users working with requirement management. Well, I'm setting up the internet connection here. So a scenario for requirement management in general might be the following. So we have Jennifer, who is a product leader, who might have input on requirements capture and want to take the market requirements or any requirements into the 3D Experience platform. Those are handed over to a systems architect. In this example, it will be Sandra. And she will import the requirements, review them, and connect them to the relevant product and system breakdown. Systems engineer will review them towards features, functions, different configuration rules perhaps, and the product specification. Reviewing the system features, determining test scope. A product or project or program manager will review the activities and tasks and might approve the product links and perform the gate reviews and setup of the project, which determines the scope of the DHF. A test specialist or test engineer or validation engineer will perform the test, determine if the specification is correct. If not, it will be an iteration loop. And of course, there could be several iteration loops. At some point in time, the systems engineer will review a subsystem, determine change impact, and determine the results of verification. And go ahead with the validation, approve the change, and close the change order for that change. So that's rather typical scenario. It's really to map the requirements to the product design. So even though the users we might focus on will be a validation engineer and a system architect, the people typically involved in the full requirements loop will be a project manager, it will be a design leader, systems architect, it might be the safety lead reviewing the risk analysis and the hazards. It definitely will be Jennifer providing initial input, setting up the intended use. It will be Helen reviewing regulatory requirements and regulatory status if we connect it to product requirement or product compliance requirements. So it's quite a wide set of users in the platform who will work with this functionality. So we will log into the system, and let's use this link. Let's see if we still are active in this environment. So I've logged in as Sandra System Architect, and just want to see if I can. Yes, I could. So let's jump back. So as an architect, I might see the active requirement specs I'm working on, and I can, in this case, we see that some are read from regulatory library. Those are owned by Quality Lead, which have set up the general standards, product and process requirement standards. And as system architect, I especially pick up the product requirement part of those standards to understand what do they look like and how should I use them. I have a trace on the different requirement specs. I can see their different revisions. I could for example, decide on upcoming revisions in order to understand future revisions, what's coming up with regards to regulatory changes on the standards, which are general device standards. So the functionality on the document level is really to capture the requirements, build up the Word document or the requirement specification document folder or document container, review different specs, and then jump to definition of specific requirements. On this level, I can create new specifications. I could generate a folder for all specifications, or I map them directly to the DHF for the design input folder, or whatever folder I'm using within the context of my project folder, and then I'm using this functionality here. At any point in time, I can generate a traceability report to understand how are we with regards to the trace on test levels. At any point in time, I can compare status on the requirement structure, compare it with other revisions, compare it with other specs, perhaps the structure of a different product. And at any point in time, I can initiate a change. I could also subscribe on regulatory changes, for example, which might be relevant for these standard libraries here. The information I get is that we have an active requirement specs I'm working on, which has not been released yet. It's just in preliminary state. I have a number of general standards which have been released by David, and I'm working on a detailed requirement spec for my heart starter, and that's in the making, so it's in draft status. If I select on the requirement spec, I open it up. I have the proper access rights to edit it, and then I have quite extensive functionality. The main tool I'm working with is called the Structure Browser, which is say a document layout structure view on one or many requirement specs. And here I have my different sections or chapters in the requirement spec. So I'll expand the structure just to see what do we have inside our specification. It seems to be a fairly large structure, and what we'll see here are my different interface definitions with comments or reference information. And as you can see, there's some explanation on the system interface, what it means. And under this section here, I have my different requirements, and I can see what test cases have been connected to this one. So if I select on this section, I might have some detailed information here, and within each section or requirement I can include images, pictures, and of course if I've defined them in with this HTML editor, this information will later on be placed in the document printout which I'm generating from the system. So I'll close this one. I'll can scroll down to see what are the different requirements, what are the different tests. And if I scroll a little bit to the right, we have the different classifications on requirements. I have their different states. Have we picked it up? Has this one been validated? What's the status on this level? I can determine its allocation. So have I connected it up to my product definition? And what's the complexity of the requirement and its priority? And I can see who's the current owner. I can have, of course, multiple owners or people interacting on the requirement, detailing it, working on this simultaneously. But it's important that I have strict control on my on the editing capabilities. Here I have an idea of the validation history, what we have over time on the different versions. And if I would have used a configuration context, a configured product, I can then see, okay, within what subsystem of a configuration was this used, with which sales item, and I can determine what's the effectivity of a particular feature, of a particular requirement in my prototype design or in my configuration. So that gives good understanding of where we are with regards to the requirement in our design. The functionality is under action. So here I can detail new requirements. Of course, I can perform comparisons with other designs or other functional specs. I can generate reports, check the history of the structure, what has been changed, and also here see what has been, what are the changes and how do they act on this breakdown. If I would have had later revisions on a subsystem which have an impact on our requirements, it will create these warning signs, and I then have tools to easily update to a later revision, and of course review my system based on that. Whenever I'm done with my modifications, I can generate a new Word document for this requirement spec through just selecting on this Word icon. It's a .NET application, so I need to have .NET activated, and it will, when I select it, generate the files based on all the information we have in this window. And I can then, for the task, for example, in a DHF, I will have both a link to this active requirement spec and also then a link to the generated file. So if we log on to this environment with the user Chris, so let's have a look. Let's use, this is Chris. Let's see if we have an active project. See if I'm still active in the system. It seems so. Good. So if I'm Chris working with the project, which is the AED development, I'll select on the project and I navigate to the schedule where we have our work breakdown structure. Assume that we have the following phase gates, and requirement spec is typically part of the product concept. So we'll navigate to the product concept phase, look at our different deliverables here, and we see that we have a PRS as one of the tasks. And it's on product management or marketing to set up the product requirement spec. And as you can see here, the deliverables for this task will be the link to the requirement spec, the actual document, so I can see the details, and the generated, in this case, a controlled document copy, so it's a PDF file. They're actually active now. The task is not the current task, so they are waiting to be approved in the next gate review. Now I'm Chris, so I might not have the access credentials in order to edit the requirement spec, but I certainly will be able to view it. So if I select on this one, it seems it's sends me to the Word document, and you can see that this one has been generated from the system. It has not gone through the gate review yet, so that section has not been populated. This document is generated from the system, and when we scroll down here, we're coming down to the system design. This was an image which we saw inside the application interface definition. I think we'll look at that in the system. It was actually this exact image, and here we see the different requirements in the document. So this one is traced, or this one is generated from the system. So built-in GPS transmitter. So this is this requirement which we see here. So it's really an easy way to generate requirement specs based on detailed requirements. The requirements as such, the way to capture them, you can read them from XML files, you can read them from other requirements tools, whether it's Doors or Pilgrim or whatever tool you're used to for requirement capture, in order to easily insert them and map them towards your prototypes and products and your test sets. So usually when introducing these kind of tools, you don't introduce them from scratch. It's perhaps not your first attempt on requirement management. You might keep them in Excel, you might keep them in other systems, but there are a lot of good connectors in order to read them in, to make them visible to the cross-functional device development team, so everyone sees the same single version of the truth for requirements, and the organization have the possibility or responsibility to map them towards the products. If we look at the different properties, if we drill down into one of the requirements here, let's do that. So yeah, a comment before leaving the topic on the requirement spec. Of course, we have discussion threads, same discussion threads, decision tracking and issue tracking, which we have in a change control and the document management functionality. The traceability tools looks like the following. So when selecting on this one, takes the complete structure, and if I want to track requirements to tests, it automatically launches the traceability tracking. And if I want to drill down into and see what are the issues which have not passed validation, I can easily drill down to what's the requirement and what's the test, and which test record. And I navigate directly over to the actual test. And in this case, it's what were the details on the specific test. The test case, we have all the details on that one. How was it allocated? How was it set up? So if we drill down then into one specific requirement, we can see what kind of test cases have been attached to this one. What kind of parameters have been defined for this requirement. So this is typically used for calibration and test purposes, where we define essential requirements and map them to key characteristics. Then they are defined as parameters, and these parameters can be connected to these requirements. I doubt that there are any let's see. So I got a warning that the hardware was updated. Anyway, on the parameters, these are detailed parameter definitions whenever used for realizing a specific requirement. And here I have the history on all the what's been discussed for this requirement. If there are any discussion threads, I doubt there are any. If there are any decisions made, whatever they might be. If I have any related objects, I can see the complete connected items here. And this could be on one requirement or a set of requirements. So here we can see that this is referred to in this requirement spec. There was a decision related to this one. It's connected to one specific revision of this automatic. So it's part of that build. A number of test cases and also a use case definition. So it really gives a good overview of where we stand with regards to that specific requirement. And of course, I can run the traceability analysis on that specific requirement as well. That's for the individual requirements. We will proceed on the and review the different roles. So obviously, system architect, system engineer, perhaps design engineers are the ones who set up the requirements and detail them. The validation specialist owns the test sets. It might be from recommendation of the systems engineer, of course, but the whole essence here is to have a good exchange of the responsibilities between the different teams. And it might be prototyping engineers, or it might be whoever is in charge of the prototype validation. To sum up this, so how are the different requirements navigated and used? If we're on, in this case, Chris, we will use this project to navigate over to the let's do the following. We were in the this requirement specification, and we reviewed the related objects, and we navigated down to one of the requirements here and wanted to know which product was referred. We go to that product. Okay, that was not possible. Let's do the following. Okay, we have a finally tough day for this demo environment. On the products, of course, we have the mapping of different requirements. So here we can see what are the approved requirements on this particular product. Now, the product might reside on the sales item, typically. The product might reside on the higher product definition, so product family. The requirements might be detailed into a specific prototype or evolution of a product. So you have to map them on the appropriate level. And they always reflect whatever configuration you're using. So if you're using the configuration setup with 3D Experience platform, you will see the different requirements to be used with any particular configuration. So it gives you good understanding of current requirements and active requirements for a particular design. So the way the requirements are used could be to break down the intended use and essential requirements. Of course, can be used to describe the list of standards and the list of claims. Typically, traditional domain for requirement management is to map them with features and subsystem definitions, logical and functional views, and the different prototypes, evolutions, and the builds. So you can see what was actually valid for a particular build. So it's used for verification and validation purposes. It has a reference to the DHF. It could have a reference to the DMR and the technical file if I want that. And then I can use the requirements to determine the readiness of the technical file. It can be used to represent a top-level assembly for different items, configured or non-configured. It can be used for detailed requirements for any regulatory or technical application. One important use of requirements in medical device applications is, of course, to use them together with the risk analysis and risk management according to ISO 14971. So we use the requirements in order to rule out or implement risk control measures, and we use the test setup to map test records to the definition of the requirements and determine how we resolve the risks. And to give you an idea of the functionality, fast forwarding to a small movie. So and as you can see here, I'm working in the DHF functionalities, so project and DHF management, and that's where the risk functionality is present, or hazard functionality is present when I'm working in an active development project or change project. And I go into a specific project, and under the tab for folders, I have my functionality to define hazards, and I can create new hazards in line with relevant standards. So first on the identification, conditions, sequence of events, and this maps well to the ISO 14971 standard. So this is where I map them with the risks, and I can see for each and every hazard how have I implemented the risk mitigation, what is actually resolving this hazard, or how do I mitigate? How do I intend to mitigate it? The details on identification, classification of the hazard, and then the status over time. How do I handle the residual risk? Have I handled it? Is it still open? And if so, what's their status? And this follows with the development project, of course, all through the development project. If I have the proper access rights, I will be able to edit risks and update their statuses, of course. I can drag and drop the hazards and requirements in order to easily set up my complete traceability matrix. And here we can see how I map the requirements to the hazards, to the different design inputs and the design outputs. And I can break those down into detailed test records if I would like to. This is a way to map both the requirements and hazards to the deliverables all through the build-up of the DHF, all through the execution of the development projects. If I drill down into one of the hazards, I have a setup of different options for risk control. I have, of course, the mapping to the different requirements. If I want to add additional requirements, I can see if I've connected it with other hazards, what would they be? If there are other related hazards and define their dependencies. I can connect them with tasks in my project setup, or if I want to map them with my activities in design controls. These are the actual tasks I have predefined. And I can have templates for different hazards, different kind of hazards, which will require a certain set of tasks. The RPN summary is the matrix, and I could add one or several different reference documents on my hazard analysis. Okay. I can also navigate over to the product, and this is what I then will see under the DHF tab on the product. I have a hazard assessment as well as a traceability matrix, which shows the risk matrix. So it maps the different RPN values to the matrix. And also here from the product I can generate hazards. So it's an interaction between the development project and the product in order to deliver the risk analysis to the product. And when I've released, the risk analysis lives on the product. And also here I have the traceability matrix, so I can see how are the hazards related to my design inputs as well as design outputs. And I can see how I deal with the residual risk. So those parts are rather related to the change process, the engineering change process. It's standard procedure. Whatever I change in my design, in my setup as part of design controls, will typically touch upon the risk analysis. So that's why it's so essential for this functionality. And that's also why we have it as part of the DHF on the product as well as on the project. So that gives you an idea. The risk and hazard functionality was introduced with 15X. I believe it was in FixPack 4, so it's not on the GA level. If introduced, and when introduced, you will have the additional tabs with hazard assessment and traceability on the product and in the DHF menus. So that's how to easily detect it. We have a few minutes left. I have time for a few set of questions, if there are any, from anyone who is calling in. No raised hands as far as I can see. If you'd like to have additional details, this webinar is recorded, but also you can reach out to us, and we will provide you with a detailed demonstration. It's typically useful to have a relevant product, a relevant project, and the setup of requirements in order to give a good scenario for a demonstration. With that, I close today's session. This session has been recorded, so it's available on our website under this URL under the events. So if you want to share this with colleagues. Just send this link and they will see the full history. So we've gone through sessions on UDI, we've gone through sessions on document management, we've gone through sessions on the new development project, DHF build-up, on change management and CRCO for more mature designs, where we also covered the EBOM, MBOM functionality. We've covered the quality processes, everything from complaints to non-conformances, and how that goes into a COPPA process and a change process. And today, traceable requirements, mentioning the risk controls. Since a few versions of CATIA, the risks and the risk management parts are integrated inside CATIA. So the requirements can be viewed on CATIA models where they've been set up, which really creates a powerful tool to drive requirements management in general for medical devices, especially if you're working in CATIA, but also a full integration to CATIA if you want to work with residual risk. So that's a really powerful scenario for users working with CATIA. The parts which were shown here today is of course valid for all CAD systems, whether it's SolidWorks or Creo or Solid Edge. So this is the standard functionality in the current version of License Secure. In the coming sessions, we will look more into a touch again on requirements with reference to product compliance requirements and regulatory submissions. So that's a session I'm looking forward to in just a week from now. So you're welcome back to that session. And thank you very much for today. Thank you.